Greetings and welcome back. In my practice, I'm sometimes asked, what's next? What's on the horizon in the science of nutrition? The same topic often arises at professional conferences. Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do see some trends. So in this lecture, we're going to be discussing the future of nutrition. We'll talk a little bit more about consumer trends a bit later, but I want to tell you about some exciting, cutting-edge scientific advances in nutrition. Well, you've heard of the Human Genome Project, completed a number of years ago. This was an effort that identified all the 20,000 to 25,000 genes in the human DNA. Thanks to this project, the information that is available is beginning to integrate science and technology into the healthcare arena for our population. And that brings us to a word that maybe you haven't heard of before called nutritional genomics, encompassing two fields, nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics. What are these terms? Let's define them. Nutrigenetics is a field where the nutritional interventions are planned around the genetic expression of a disease. So you already know you have someone who has a genetically linked disease. And an example would be a disease called phenylketonuria. That is a genetically transmitted disease in which a specific dietary intervention, such as the manufacturing of a phenylalanine-free infant formula, is the treatment. So we know what the disease is, and the treatment is designed around it. Nutrigenomics, simply stated, is eating for your genotype. It is the relationship between nutrition and specific nutrients with the functioning of the human genome. Think about it this way. Your genes can determine whether eating a low cholesterol or low sodium diet for you as an individual will give the desired results. Your own genetic blueprint will truly give you a 1 in a million diet prescription. So I want you to just think about the implications of that for a minute. It also includes the study of the impact of environmental factors on gene expression. This could include age, diet, smoking, alcohol, and even things like region of the country. Think about vitamin D. You make more vitamin D in sunny climates than you do in cold climates. The convergence of these two terms and the information they provide are necessary to completely cover the benefits of nutritional genomics. So what is the significance? Common dietary substances can act on the human genome, either directly or indirectly, to alter gene expression or structure. Under certain circumstances and some individuals, diet can be a serious risk factor for the number of diseases. Think of this as your genetic crystal ball. As an example, if you have a genetic complement that increases your risk of type 2 diabetes, staying lean, avoiding becoming overfat, and giving regular physical activity from childhood might be your prescription. You know what's in the future, and now you have the ability to modify it. Some diet-regulated genes and their normal common variants are likely to play a role in the onset, incident, progression, and/or severity of some chronic illnesses. So we might ask the question, who's most likely to develop cirrhosis of the liver? Not all individuals who consume the same amount of alcohol have the same progression. Similarly, not all individuals who become obese develop fatty infiltration of the liver. The secret code and the answer lies in your genes. The degree to which diet influences the balance between healthy and disease states may depend on the individual's genetic makeup. Dietary intervention based on the knowledge of a nutrition requirement, nutritional status, and genotype, remember that individualized nutrition, can be used to prevent, mitigate, or even possibly cure chronic diseases. And throughout this series, you haven't heard me say cure disease, but this might be the avenue by which we're able to do that. This will add a new and personal component to the nutrition assessment process. In our lecture on creating your own nutrition plan, we talked about the A, B, C, and D of assessment, and now genes can add the G to that alphabet. Those chronic diseases just mentioned have become the leading health concerns of public health. Most of the common disorders are diet-related, and certainly examples would include cancers, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, neurological disorders, obesity, osteoporosis, and other inflammatory disorders. All of these disorders represent an imbalance in homeostasis, which just means the balance of the normal functioning of the body. They are linked to not only environmental, but diet factors as the cause. Some of us are far more sensitive to environmental changes and may increase the inflammatory response linked with many diseases. A specific and individualized approach to the treatment of these diseases is needed, and a solution may be in the near future. So again, you wouldn't go to a dietitian and get the same 1,200 calorie diet that he or she may prescribe for somebody else. You would get a customized program. Genetic outcomes, however, are usually modified through the interaction of genetic variations and environmental factors. So please keep in mind the environment is always going to play a role in genetic expression. So for example, you may have a budding marathon runner in your family who really doesn't like running long distances. The training he enjoys may ultimately determine his genetic outcome. So again, we've got to marry environment and genetic expression. Examples of some of the gene-nutrient interaction discoveries include cholesterol. And we've talked a lot about cholesterol throughout this course. A gene has been identified called ApoA1 that codes for the main protein in HDL cholesterol. This gene has a vital role in lipid metabolism. This data, if you have this data at your hand, this data would give you information on the type of HDL variant that you possess and that predominates in your blood, and what would be the most beneficial, if any, intervention. So again, traditionally now, individuals who have a low HDL, we prescribe the same thing. This would change the prescription of the modification of that HDL variant. We have also talked about lipids as well. The LIPC gene, an enzyme that binds and uptakes lipoproteins, codes for the enzyme hepatic lipase. This determines your liver's ability to metabolize fat. Again, that may determine who's going to end up with fatty infiltration of the liver. Well, let's look at a few more. Caffeine was studied as a risk factor for bone loss in elderly women. In the results of this study, women who consume more than 300 milligrams of caffeine, about 3 cups or 24 ounces of coffee a day, and had a variant of the vitamin D receptor, small TT genotype, had considerably higher rates of bone loss than those who had the large TT genotype. So I think, again, your genetic variation is going to determine whether or not you're going to be the one that's vulnerable to bone loss. So this data for an individual would give servings and amounts of caffeine that might be tolerated before the onset of bone loss. Certainly we have information about green tea and cancer. Observations have shown that individuals who consume high levels of green tea have a protective effect against many forms of cancer. And we discuss this in our lecture on nutrition and cancer. However, this is not the case for individuals carrying the GSTT1 null genotype. These people lack a particular enzyme involved in detoxification. So people with this null genotype would be advised to use other food sources for any kind of detoxification process. So that's almost a strange new world, isn't it? So what is the future of nutrigenomics? It is predicted that the reaction to findings in nutritional genomics research, the functional food and nutrition supplement business will considerably grow in the next decade or so. More research is needed on the influence of specific nutrients on metabolic pathways and risk for chronic disease. Research focus, and I think this is a key point, research focus might need to be refined to control for genetic variation. Right now, our closest association is looking at ethnic groups. I live in South Texas, and in deep South Texas, there is Starr County. And Starr County is unique in the fact that a good percentage of people who are born in Starr County don't ever leave. And so they have a relatively homogeneous genetic pool. So it is one of the most common places in the United States to study, for example, diabetes, because the gene pool has remained intact in Starr County. This new approach of nutrient-gene interactions may redefine the current practice of what we call preventive medicine today. So what are some key points that you could think about? Dietitians armed with all this data could specifically tailor their message to each individual based on that individual's outcome of gene interactions and nutrient intake. This method would allow people in turn to tailor their dietary and lifestyle decisions. Now, the success is oftentimes going to depend on adequate communication among healthcare providers and researchers, as well as the correct dissemination of information to the community and to consumers. So you can imagine how this information might be received. What's going to happen to the diet book industry, for example? If indeed we're all unique individuals, the sales of those books may be tailored and you might see some new things appear on your bookshelves. Another exciting new advance in the science of nutrition is metabolomics. Again, another word that you're probably not familiar with. Defined by researchers by the name of German, Watkins, and Fay, metabolomics is a comprehensive profiling of individual metabolites. Again, metabolites can be food metabolites, or they can certainly be metabolites in your own body processes that are linked to an understanding of health and human metabolism. As with nutritional genomics, this science is emerging to provide people with unique individualized health goals based on their own metabolic profile. This means that the prevention of metabolic illness is more than just steering people away from current health problems. It means our focus could change, and now we would direct metabolism in an individual way towards an optimal personal metabolic state. Dietary health is contingent on more than just genetics, so using genotype alone will not be enough to assess someone's personal health status. So what's our key point with this? In the future, comprehensive, direct assessment of your health will replace what we do now, which are looking at a single biomarker to treat disease. For example, we currently look at your cholesterol for heart disease and your glucose for diabetes. What we might look at in the future is to expand this a little bit larger and say, how do you as an individual respond to inflammation? How do you as an individual respond to other things in terms of glucose for the management of diabetes? So I always say stay tuned for more developments. Metabolite information, unlike genetic information, can change throughout a person's life due to aging, diet, and other lifestyle choices. So what might be true in terms of your metabolic profile when you're 20 may not be true when you're 50. Because of this, agreeing to have one's health evaluated through metabolomics may be an intermediary step between current practice and the use of nutrigenomics for assessing diet-related health concerns. Well, what might the benefits of metabolomics be? It will be a complete, personalized, individual view of your metabolism revealed through this method. Think of those individuals who struggle to lose weight. This might be the answer to the question for that individual person. Is my weight solely inherited, or is it mostly environmental? So think about this. You may have a genetic predisposition to becoming obese, but as you go through the life cycle, your metabolites in your blood change, and now the weight loss plan that worked for you in your 20s needs to be modified and customized for you as you age. Metabolic changes in individuals are oftentimes, again, due to environmental and lifestyle changes and aging. These can be identified by this new process. Possible health outcomes and vulnerabilities of individuals to metabolic stress may be predicted. Now, with all of this, we have to stop and reflect about the ethics in this emerging science. So what are some of the things to consider? So although this sounds like, oh my goodness, this is so wonderful, we have to stop back and think, what might the consequence be? Well, some of the things we have to consider is how are we going to secure and safeguard confidentiality? What about ensuring privacy rights? What about this big one, facing the discrimination regarding insurance coverage and employment? So if an insurance provider understands that you are at significantly greater risk of heart disease or significantly greater risk of diabetes, may employment discrimination emerge? Certainly dealing with the genetic examination of children and some of the limits of parental authority. Deciding whether you as an individual want to share this personal information with other family members. So that's, again, this strange new world of what's coming in the future in terms of that diet and disease relationship. And now I think we can change our focus and start to take a look at some food-related trends. What are consumers interested in the future? Well, according to the Mintel Trend Study, which is a consumer survey, about 70% of U.S. adults are attempting to consume healthier diets. Most consumers are interested in nutrition and try and make healthy choices when purchasing products. What about customer or consumer preferences? As we have seen, science suggests that advanced diagnostics are on the way, but trends of American eating patterns still drive food selection and market-driven products. So again, the Mintel study shows us these trends. What was learned seems to indicate diverging trends. We as American consumers, we want something that's quick and easy, but we also want this back to basics. We want, again, maybe a little bit more holistic approach to nutrition. What are some of the things in convenience that American consumers want? We want portability, and we want one-handed consumption. I'm always a little concerned about this one-handed consumption. So does that mean we want to have foods that we can drive with? Does this mean we want to be able to multitask at our desks and eat our lunch in one hand and type with another? But we certainly want things that are convenient. It's also on the rise in many families with young children who are always on the go. I certainly remember when my son played high school soccer, I worked full-time and we ate a lot of sandwich dinners at 10 o'clock at night because I didn't have everything convenient that I needed to have to fix a home-cooked dinner when we got home so late. We also want ways of bringing a restaurant experience into our home, and you might notice this when you go to the grocery store right now. Some examples include things like microwavable panini sandwiches, some of the gourmet frozen pasta dinners for families like chicken, broccoli, fettuccine alfredo. Things that you would normally get in a restaurant are now kind of emerging to the American table. Customer convenience in packaging and preparation. We now have resealable cookie and cracker packages, plastic reusable lunch meat containers, microwavable packages of frozen vegetables that are already pre-seasoned for us. So we want convenient, but we also want this back to the basics trend. Many consumers have seemed to reverse their food consumption patterns. Now, even the Mintel study showed a focus on cooking homemade meals versus convenience products. I will tell you, in my family, my daughter always played sports growing up in high school. And so she goes to college and she calls me and says, "Mom, I really need to know how to heat up a lean cuisine dinner." And I said, "Well, you just pop it in the microwave." And she said, "But is it microwavable safe?" And it taught me that she not only didn't really know convenience foods, she certainly didn't know how to make a home-cooked meal. So now we're seeing on television cooking channels and other things that are teaching us to make things that are almost homemade. So I think the Mintel study survey is showing us that we want homemade meals, but we might want to integrate homemade and convenience. Some consumers are not using all the new and improved products. They're going back to basics and purchasing whole food and cooking at home. We've discussed in previous lectures almost the resurgence of the farmer's market in terms of bringing people some fresher produce to their table. Others, again, are participating in growing their own produce through home gardens or herb gardens or being involved in community garden projects. The challenge, however, is to oftentimes marry the desire to have all of these more natural type products with our hectic American lifestyle. So using whole foods instead of highly processed foods is a trend that's becoming popular among all populations. The question is, how do we get that done? So when we think, okay, we've got this, I need convenient, I need portable, but I also want homemade. Doesn't this conflict? Aren't these conflicting messages? But actually, if you think about it, these trends actually converge. For example, I will admit, I purchase pre-cut vegetables to make a stir fry at home. So I like the convenience of pre-cut fresh, but I also have to have something that's homemade. I like that homemade flavor. Or combining pre-cut or frozen fruits and yogurt for making your own homemade smoothies. Again, one of my favorite things to do is take a bag of frozen fruit, semi-defrosted, put it in a food processor with a carton of yogurt, and now I've got a smoothie that will rival any of the companies that are out there. So we want convenience and we want freshness at the same time. So if I'm a marketing agent, I'm going to look at how am I going to get these two trends to marry. According to the Nutrition and You Food Trends Survey, choosing whole grains has also become a priority. 94% of respondents in this survey stated whole grains are healthier than refined carbohydrates, so that whole grain message is out. So you'll see food manufacturers that are trying to come up with unique front-of-package labeling to manage that consumer trend. Additionally, respondents in the study said that they have reduced their intake of dairy, pork, and beef. It is unclear whether this is just wellness-driven to avoid saturated fat, or could it be economically driven? These are very high-cost sources of protein, and again, it could be both or one. We don't have really all the data on that. Certainly, consumers are reporting increasing consumption of fruits and vegetables. This shift in food choice will influence the directions of sustainability, nutrition counseling, as well as the health conditions of the population. So when we look at the future of nutrition, what we're really looking at is what does the science say is up and coming, and what are we doing now? What are Americans interested in now? And I think, again, that summarizes nicely the future of nutrition. Well, on to those frequently asked questions. When do you think nutritional genomics and metabolomics will be viable options in the toolkits of health professionals? And again, this is really looking into the crystal ball. So clearly, the trend exists now in examining the outcome of genetic expression with advanced lipid analyses. There's a company in the United States, and there are many, but this is just one, called the Berkeley Heart Health Labs, and it does just this. It subfractionates LDL and HDL into its individual types to learn a little bit more about the type of carrier protein. And oftentimes the carrier protein, is it very effective at getting rid of the cholesterol, or is the carrier protein ineffective and now that LDL gets deposited into our arterial walls? So we already have some of this advanced diagnostics available. And again, what it's looking at is the genetic expression of the protein subtypes that are going to be responsible for transporting LDL and HDL to its respective delivery points. We also can see genetic testing for athletic performance, and that's already available as well, suggesting that you can determine your muscle fiber type predisposition. This would supposedly tell parents if their offspring could run marathons or would they be better suited to running sprints. And certainly there are countries in the world that already use some of this testing to decide who's going to do what in the Olympics. So again, although we might think of this as strange new world, there are things out there. I'm also going to remind you about the ethical dilemmas associated with that. So I think the real challenge is if indeed you had a son or daughter who was genetically gifted to run sprints, but they hated that, forcing them into an event that they didn't like or enjoy would really take away some of the pleasure of sports. So there are some companies offering those kinds of services now, but reliable interventions may be available on a more regular basis within the next 5 years. So again, stay tuned. Another frequently asked question, do you feel that metabolomics will be used to counter the effects of aging? Well, possibly, but it also raises some questions. So say, for example, what you could do in your 20s, you're genetically, your metabolites in your blood are saying, I can lose weight like this in my 20s, but I can't in my 50s. What if you can't lose weight despite not being genetically behind the 8 ball? I'm understanding this and thinking, okay, wait a minute. My genetic or my metabolomics is saying I should be able to lose this weight, but I can't. And I think oftentimes what we're missing here is the environment is always going to play a significant role. So just because your metabolomics is saying, yep, you can lose weight this way, the challenge is if you don't account for the environment, you may not be able to get the desired results. So I think when we look at this, you always have to think of, yes, this is going to give us more data, but it isn't necessarily going to solve all the problems if indeed we also don't look at that environmental expression. Okay, as we look at food trends, another question that I get is, new foods show up on the market shelves all the time. How can I tell if they're good for me or my family? Well, I always suggest go back to the basics, following that Mintel study, survey study. Go back to the basics. Is it a whole food? Is it minimally processed? And again, I think the challenge is trying to integrate convenience along with that. So again, the more hands that touch it, the more items on the ingredient list, the more likely it is to be not as healthy as a minimally processed food. Another question. You mentioned that food choices will influence the direction of health conditions of a population. In your view, are we doing better or worse than when you started your practice when it comes to our eating habits? And actually, I believe we're doing worse. We're always taking a look at, well, I don't understand why I'm overweight. When I first started in clinical practice, I didn't see the degree of obesity that I see now. The largest person in my practice that I've ever taken care of is over 1,000 pounds. And when I started, a long time ago, when I started almost 30 years ago, I didn't see this. And I now consider obesity the tsunami of public health diseases, because obesity is linked with heart disease and cancer. So actually, I think it's worse. So I think when we have all the answers, including both our genetic expression, metabolomics, we'll have more answers to this dilemma. But again, I think in terms of a public health strategy, when we're talking about obesity, we really have to look at both global and individual strategies, because I don't think we can look at just the genetic blueprint and say that's going to be the magic bullet of weight loss. We're also going to have to take a look at environmental issues as well. And thank you very much.